Greetings, and here we are in the tutorial on mastering if you are the mastering person and you have received the file from your client. So I'm going to share my screen and share audio, and let's take a look at a couple of options that have been sent in that I'm going to master. So if I open Pro Tools and I see this first tutorial and I can look at levels and say, oh, this looks decent, but you can't go by what you see in the waveforms. As you can see, this is a quite dynamic piece because there are peaks and there are quiet parts. So here's where we have a peak moment right here. We need to read on our meters what the peak moments are. So there's an average metering of all these together in LUFS, and there's also your peak meter readings, and that's what you have to take into consideration when you're doing mastering. If the peaks are not over between -9 and -12 dB TP, total peak is what you're going to see on these on the meters like the Uline meter. But I do need to see the meter in order to know if these peaks are proper or not. Is it too loud or are they just right? So let's go down to the master track, and you should have a master track. Do not insert the metering plugin on the actual track. Insert the plugin on a master fader and make sure that your track, of course, is bused to the master fader. Mastering is done at the master fader. So anything that I apply later, like the C6 plugin or the F6 or some other plugin, is going to be done at the master fader. The fader or the bus through which all the audio is going to connect to through the audio interface and out to my headphones and eventually also to the bounce. So I'm going to open up the Uline meter, and now I can take a look at this track and play it from this part. We're going to look at the meter together. So I'm playing the song.
1, 2,
it's showing.
3.
Here's my true peaks. Here's the short-term LUFS, the integrated, which is both your average and real-time dynamics. That's what all these are, and you can see the changes. What we're looking for are the peaks not going over -9. This true peak here, if I keep clicking on it, that was from the previous song, it's going to change based on the loudness. So let's go back to the louder part that happened earlier in this piece. Move this way. There's a pretty big peak that happens right in here. We're hitting -7. Nice. And let me get to a -5. Now we're still within our loudness units in real-time dynamics and short-term LUFS, but I want to be sure that the session that I'm going to master isn't really going past -9. If it dips into -8, it's okay, but this is getting equally high. Let's go to another peak moment. There's a moment there, like a quick moment where she's going quite loud. Let's try the end of this piece. So you can see that we're getting to -6, and that's going to be too loud. And you want to submit something that's quieter than that, roughly that's getting around -9. The average metering should be between 18 and 23, but it can also dip down into -26, 27. If you start getting into -30 as your average in terms of your LUFS, it's a little too quiet. But what if somewhere in this piece that it's, let's say you have a very dynamic piece and you hit something that is really loud in a moment? Well, you're really looking for the peak moments. Because when we master something, we're not going to try and erase the dynamics. We're just trying to get the peak moments tamed so that they don't go over 0. And so that we're getting as close to 0 as we can in the mastering. So in this case, I'm looking at these peak moments. I'm clicking over here just to hear what this is. So -6 for that moment right here. And that's just a quick peak moment that's happening in this moment right here. Right? You see that. So it would be better if we had something that peak moment was hitting around -9, between -9 and -12, but -9. So that's where we're at with this particular piece. Let's take a look at another one. And by the way, when you get a file, and if the tails and the tops and tails need trimming, that's fine for the mastering engineer to do. So this is where you would zoom way in on this piece and get to that beginning piece right here. But I would leave those clicks out. As the mastering engineer, I'd say, nah, I don't want those clicks in. I'm going to start it right on a dime right here. We're zoomed in a little bit, so there's a little bit of air. That's what you're looking for. Now, I haven't even applied any kind of compression or EQ at this point. We're just preparing the mastered file. I would go to the edge over here. This is using our trimmer tool, and I'd bring this in as well, but I'd take a look at it. I'm just zooming in with my T key, and I'm going to get to the end here, and I want to trim it to about here, and I want to hear what it sounds like because there may be a big reverb tail that I want to make sure that I've captured before I trim anymore. Great, so there's that reverb tail. So I could trim it in just a little bit more, and that's still going to leave the reverb tail that was originally there. Great, okay, so I've got my tops and tails. I'm ready to go on this one, but the peaks might be a little much. Could I master it? Yeah. Do you have to send it back? No. But it's better to get something that has a little bit less peak moments than this one. So let's take a look at this one over here. Oh, that looks like it has even greater peak moments. But this is a good time for you to be checking out how the U-lean meter works. So I'm going to bring the meter up, and let's just play it somewhere in the middle. And I'm going to re-click on all these just to, it's going to reset them. But notice how I'm clicking on them. The true peak is now changed. -7.2. 7.2 is a little too hot, but I think it even gets hotter way over here. Check this out. There's like -10, -6 with that hit right here. So it's a little too peaky. Now it's going to get even more peaky here. -7, -5. We have a loud moment coming up. Okay, so it doesn't go beyond -5, but still -5 is a little too high. So, do I need to send this back? It would be good to have the file that is quieter. In this case, you guys are actually working on something you're just trying out mastering. It's not something that you're going to be able to do well immediately because this is a part of the audio field that you need to get really good at and work with compression all the time. You have to get really good at compression and EQ. Your ears have to be really, really attuned to various frequencies. And you have to get to know your tools. So most mastering engineers will use an outboard, very expensive multiband compressor, like a Shadow Hills multiband compressor. We have access to a C6, a Waves C6 multiband compressor. It's on stations 1 through 11 in the lab using Splashtop. Some of you have purchased it. It's not an easy plug-in to use. You should go through tutorials. You should look at and see what it's like, because the idea of the C6 is that you are able to compress certain bands of frequency, but not all of them. So in terms of the things that we were hearing that were really loud at those peak moments, it was the moments for me in my hearing where I heard the snare snap really loudly and Katie's voice get really loud as well. So this is pretty much in the mid-range, upper mids, anywhere between 2K and 5K, where it got super snappy and loud. And that's where you were seeing those readings at -5 dB, the peaks. So I would probably want to set a compressor that is taming the peaks in those moments, but leaving the low end, leaving the richness and the dynamics of the low end, because the low end is not too loud in this. And that's the reason why you want to use a multiband compressor as opposed to an all frequency, everything in the track compression, which is a compressor that would be used when you're, let's say, using a compressor on a kick drum or a bass or a vocal. Typically, we don't use multiband compressors there, though we can. But the idea is that you can use a multiband when you have all frequencies coming through your master fader that is being applied to a stereo mix, because all frequencies are being represented in the stereo wave file that has been mixed down, that the mastering engineer is seeing. So here, what we want to do is tame certain ranges of frequency. That we're going to do in the next tutorial.